Good evening, majors. Today we're going to learn about CPCTC, which is your notes for Unit 4. This is Day 7 notes. The very first part, we're just going to remember how to prove triangles are congruent. You now have 5 postulates to prove that they're congruent. And now we're going to look at what we can prove after we've proven our triangles are congruent. It says if 2 triangles are congruent, then the 3 corresponding angles will be congruent and all 3 corresponding sides are congruent. So the abbreviation for the statement is CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So they're telling us these 2 triangles are congruent. This triangle is congruent to this triangle. Remember, order matters. They're congruent in order. So what we can do is say the corresponding angles. C is the first one, so angle C is congruent to the first one, which is angle D. We did the opposite when we're making our congruency statement. We looked at the triangle and then we put them in order. Now we're looking at the actual angles. The second one is A, is congruent to the second one, which is O. And then the third one is T, is congruent to the third one, which is G. Also, the sides are congruent. So the first 2 sides are CA and then DO. For it to be a side, we need a line above it. The second 2 is AT and OG. And then the third side is going to be C and T, D and G. First and last, first and last. And that's how we make our congruencies from CPCTC. So it says use the marked diagram to state the method used to prove the triangles are congruent. Then name the additional corresponding parts that could then be concluded to be congruent by CPCTC. So first we're saying, can we prove these triangles are congruent? Well, we have this side, DA, is congruent to this side, YB. And we have this angle is a 90-degree angle. It's congruent to this angle is a 90-degree angle. And we know that by the reflexive property, AY is congruent to AY. So we know that AY, write it down, is congruent to AY, and this is the reflexive property. Now, we know that these 2 triangles are congruent. Please cover up the bottom triangle, and we're going to start where there's no congruencies, and we're going to go clockwise or counterclockwise. Let's go counterclockwise, and we're going to go, this is a side. This red thing is an angle. And then this blue thing is a side. Side, angle, side. So are they congruent? Yes, that is a postulate. So we're going to say yes. And then they want the order. They went from A to B to Y. Is congruent to triangle. They started at A, which on the bottom triangle, they're looking at the bottom triangle. A is between the blue and the no congruency mark side. So the one on top that is in between the blue and the no congruency side is Y. And then they went to B, which is in between green and no congruency. And then there's up top that's in between green and no congruency is D. And then they went to Y, which is the right angle. On the top triangle, the one with the red right angle is A. YDA. Now, after we've proven my triangles are congruent and we've set up our congruency statement, we know more congruencies by CPCTC. We know that this side, DY, is congruent to this side, AB. So I can say DY is congruent to AB. I think that's my last side. Also, I know that this angle D is congruent to this angle B. And I know that maybe this angle Y is congruent to this angle A, but I can't name it as angle Y because there's too many things going on here. So Y has to be in the middle. So I'm going to say angle DYA is congruent to angle A has to be in the middle down here. I'm going to say BAY. Oops, put the angle symbol. All right, I want you guys to try this one out. Can you prove that it's congruent? And if you can, then make your congruencies. Write down everything else you know is congruent. Flip your paper over. Let's go over some proofs. I'm going to show you where this fits into our proofs. So I'm just going to highlight everything that they tell us first. BA is congruent to DA. BA is congruent to DA. Just write that in. And we know that CA is congruent to EA. It's already kind of in our diagram. Use your colors. That'll help you. BA is congruent to DA. This is given. CA is congruent to EA. That's also up here. It's also given. Sometimes they like to split it up. Now, they're saying these two triangles do intersect. They meet at A. So we're either going to have the reflexive property or vertical angles. So they're either sharing a common side or we have vertical angles. In this case, they have CAB is congruent to EAD. How do we know that? Let's look at where those two angles are. CAB is this angle right here, is congruent to EAD, which is this angle right here. The reason why we know these two angles are congruent is because we have vertical angles. These are vertical angles. So let's write it down. These are vertical angles. And then we're proving that's enough information to prove my triangles are congruent. So whenever we get to this step where we're actually saying this triangle is congruent to this triangle, then my reason for this step is always going to be either side, 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 angle, side, or angle, side, angle. Now we have HL. We have 5 postulates. We have 5 different reasons. In this case, we have a side. We're going to start over here where there's no congruency. We're going to go to a side, the angle, and then the side. Okay, we can't skip anything. We can't start in the middle and do angle and then do the side and then skip an angle and a side and an angle. That's not how it works. We have to start where there's no congruencies and go side, angle, side. So my reason for this one is the side, angle, side postulate. This is like day 1. And now I can prove what I'm trying to prove. After I've proven that my triangles are congruent, after that, I can prove that anything in those triangles, the corresponding angles of the corresponding sides are congruent. So this one, they're saying C is the first one, angle C, and angle E is the first one. But the first one is congruent to the first one. So C is congruent to E, and I can plug it in there. Angle C is congruent to angle E. My reason is always going to be CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And it's pretty formulaic. It's always going to be like this. After we prove my triangles are congruent, we can prove anything about them are congruent by CPCTC. This is my reason. Let's try another one. This one is very, very common. I've seen this proof many times. We're given that my triangles are congruent. These two triangles though, ACD is congruent to BCD. So they're actually telling us that this triangle is congruent to this triangle. So this is ACD. Separate them. It's easier if you separate them. Okay, so triangle ACD is congruent to triangle BDC, sorry. And that right here is given. They gave that to us, which means that AC is this side is congruent to this side, right? These two sides are the ones that are congruent. And you can tell because AC are my first two, is congruent to my first two, which are BD. So BD put a line above it. And that's because after we prove my triangles are congruent, we can prove anything about them. The corresponding sides, in this case, are congruent by CPCTC. This is CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And we can prove that angle A is congruent to angle, A is the first one, has to be congruent to the first one, which is B, angle B, because of CPCTC also. And then we can prove that BED is congruent to, because of vertical angles. What is vertical to BED? BED is vertical to AEC. These two are my vertical angles. So angle AEC. Angle, side theorem. So these two triangles are congruent. BED is congruent to this triangle. Let's fill in everything we have. So we already have AC is congruent to BD. So AC is congruent to BD. We have my vertical angles, and we have angle A is congruent to angle B. Angle A is right here, is congruent to angle B right here. And we know that my two triangles are congruent because, or let's put them in order. So they started with B, which is my green congruency, which we're going to start with A. That's my green congruency mark. And then they said E, which is my vertical angle. E also has that angle, the purple angle. And then they went to D, which is going to be our C. These two triangles are congruent because of, if they tell you angle, side, let's look at it. We have an angle, very next angle, and then the red side. Now in these triangles, we can have CE is congruent to DE, which is what we're trying to prove, because we already proved my triangles are congruent. And in these triangles, we have these two sides. So corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. I recommend you guys go up and try this proof again. I can see this being on the paper part of your test or one of these. Make sure you go back and try these proofs again without looking at your notes and see if you can do them by yourself. And that is it. Have a great day, Majors.